talk a bit about what the kind of student you were when you were here and what you're up to, and then what you did since.
Well, when I was here, well done for turning up on a Monday morning. I probably came 2004, 5, can't remember. I'd come from the band world. Originally I was going up to LIPA in Liverpool. My band had just got signed, so I thought I've got to stay here and at least make a go of it, keep the parents happy and pretend to turn up to uni. By the end of the first year, the band had sort of run its course. I was already well into the second year. I'd already started what has now become a 13-year residency with Ministry of Sound, so I was already kind of on the road 2 or 3 days a week, fitting in uni around it and writing my dissertation in hotel rooms and God knows where. I'd kind of already dabbled in the production side of things. I did the SCP course that some of you guys are on, which from the sounds of it is pretty different. So I was very much not one of the academics, shall we say, on the course. I was very much a creative. I was a writer, producer, rather than a sort of an engineer or on the live side. And definitely wasn't on the kind of the software coding, intellectual side, shall we say. I graduated in 2007. By that point, I was full-time on the road. With various acts I'd come from, through my sort of residency with Ministry, I was looking after all the acts that come through the label and the sub-brands, things like the Ministry tours, the stuff at the venue. If you've ever been there, check it out. It's probably one of the best sound systems on the planet at the moment. All the Head Candy tours, if you've heard of them, at that point they were flying high. We were probably shifting well over 1 million records a year on compilations. Through that I got to sort of be more involved away from the brand side and more on the band and the acts that would come through at the label and then through the dance world. So I got to look after sort of events in Ibiza with Basement Jaxx, was probably the most high profile. Candy Staton, if the name rings a bell, Young Hearts Run Free and the original You've Got the Love. Loads of legacy acts, Julia McKnight, the soul singer, and then even into kind of like the urban world with people like Temper T, Wiley, Deneo, and Neo and people like that. And then off the back of being in the sort of the popular end of the circles and being in the studio, my sort of production, and a few years later I actually finally started making use of my parents' investment on my degree, and the kind of the production and the engineering side started to come through. Currently I am juggling about 3 or 4 different projects. So I have my own Bud artist project that I work with deadmau5 in America. I still have my residency with Ministry that kind of just bubbles away in the background. This week, for example, I am on remix duties with Rollo, who, if you've heard of, is one of the original guys from Faithless and Dido. They have a new R&D project. I'm working with Grammy winners Dirty Vegas, if you've heard of them, and I'm currently in-house for Formula E. For any of you guys who are into motorsport, I do all their broadcast event, soundtrack stuff that goes into everything they do for sort of video reels, highlights, the online stuff for socials, the broadcast stuff that goes out for licensing all around the world, for like the official side of the broadcasts. They also run things like the computer game side, esports. I do a lot of stuff with them on that. That's currently where I'm at, I think.
How do you juggle all that?
I try and work in sections, so because it's project based, it's a little bit easier. So very much if I'm in touring mode, I'm in touring mode. I haven't been on the road regularly for a couple of years now, so I'm very much in sort of the studio most of the time now. And I'll just gig on weekends, so kind of Thursday through to Sunday will be gigs, but generally Monday through to Thursday I am very much in either composition mode or engineering mix, production mode.
When you say gigs, do you mean percussion?
Yeah, percussion or sort of live DJ/live shows. As far as juggling it, it's one of the cliche self-employed skills of just having a bit of sort of being very rigid with your time and splitting the day up and knowing when to switch on and knowing when to switch off.
So I think we spoke earlier that you've got a manager, but that manager looks after certain aspects of what you do. How does that work?
Yeah, so my management deal covers it's artist management, so everything as Chris Budd is me, and that's very much freelance, and I'll have a number of sort of non-exclusive agents, fixers, who handle things like my session work. Anything on the live side that isn't for my own project. My artist guys just handle anything that is for essentially artist side of things, so releases, contract negotiations, all the kind of the more rigid side of being an artist, accounts and all the boring stuff. And then that kind of it generally bleeds in anyway, because things come in on the soundtrack stuff from there, where I can bring it in, and everyone wants their 20% when they can get it.
Absolutely. Okay, so this kind of portfolio approach that you have to your career, what would you say, doing a bit of a SWOT analysis on this, what are the strengths and weaknesses of that?
I mean, the strengths, this morning, whether I got a line on a Monday morning, I'd have to go and have a CEO of a record company chew my ear off on a Monday morning at 8 o'clock in a sales meeting, or it's been able to work on what I want when I want, which is the kind of the standard approach for any creative who's self-employed. Really, it's being able to choose something that I'm passionate about, or not necessarily even have to do it for the money. I can pick something that'll be a fun gig, or a fun tour, or a fun musical project, or even like a business-based thing, or even do things like this morning, and get involved in things I want to get involved in, and forget about the things I don't really.
And what about the downside?
It's getting paid. You can work potentially on, especially things in the soundtrack world, you can work on a project for months and months, and it can go to heads of creative, heads of department or directors, and they can just veto that project straight away and go, no, it's crap, we'll get someone else. The kind of the hire and fire 'em approach with self-employment is pretty cutthroat. It's competitive, probably more so now than ever, with the standard of the standard of production. Certainly, you can go and, for example, with a remix, a label can commission that remix for a higher profile artist, but then some kid in Russia in a basement can do a bootleg of the record that's actually better, and they'll just hit him up and get him to do it for free because it fulfills their cause. So it's kind of a lot of the time the strengths and the weaknesses cross over, because they're kind of both, depending on how you approach it. The traditional sort of weaknesses of how you get paid or when you get paid can kind of just be put to one side. They can become an opportunity. It just frees up time. If someone hasn't paid me, I'll just stop working on the project and go on to another one until I do. It's the flexibility, which can be a strength for some people or a weakness for others, depending on how you want to work, or how sort of disciplined you are with your time, and how fast you can work, I suppose.
Okay. I'm looking at your notes here. Some interesting stuff here about your reflections on the music business and the audio and the kind of the sector that you're in. So you're mainly on the dance side.
The electronic side.
Do you want me to give you some prompts on that, or do you want to talk about it more generally?
Label side, or
you've got the kind of the structure of the industry and the kind of the way the deals work and that kind of stuff.
Or don't work.
I
think certainly compared to, if you compare an electronic act to, say, signing a band, or the horrible world of girl and boy bands, the traditional deal would be, someone knocks on the door and says, hi, can I have X amount of money for my band, or we want this much money to develop a girl band. The dance world is much more linked with kind of like the urban world. It's much more singles driven and much more independent, so it's a lot more sort of small, boutique-y little labels and more the heavyweight indies, I suppose. You'll get phrases thrown around like incubating a project and upstream. I don't know if you've done what an upstream is on an act yet. You'll get it often on with bands, but virtually all the time on an electronic act now, where, especially with kind of like the EDM boom in the States and anything commercial, you'll probably build a project on an independent label, take it to a certain point, and then the big boys will come knocking. So you've done the sort of, like, as we call it, like the 0 to 60 development, where the majors won't touch that anymore. And they'll come in when the project's already popping, you know, they know this is shifting X number of units, or all the really horrible metrics that a major will judge that act on, you know, things like your social media numbers and engagement, and they'll have very sophisticated software to work out what's trending on any given day online, be it Twitter or Spotify. The big one for a while was Shazam, you know, especially in the dance world, is the easiest metric of how well that dance record is doing was how many Shazam hits did it get off the dance floor this weekend, or things like, is it already in the system at Radio 1, is it getting playlisted without press promo or a label behind it? Probably with a band it's a lot different. On the creative side, essentially, yeah, you can make it on, you know, so if you've got laptops out, you could sit here and make a laptop while make a track on a laptop while you're listening to me, email it to a label and have it signed by the end of the day. With a band, I don't think you're going to do that. You know, it's the lead, you know, the research and development, the R&D time on a band and the cost is so high, which is why, you know, you look down the chart or the playlist on Radio 1, and as much as it's a lot of depressing pop crap, you kind of have to wonder why, and it's simply because the labels, certainly the majors, they can't afford to sign a band. You know, it's going to cost you scary numbers sometimes get branded around. The most recent one was it takes you anything from about £500,000 to £750,000 to take a band to market. So from the point of signing that act, giving them an advance, if there's a bidding war on that act, the numbers can be ridiculous. Then you've got to get them in the studio, pay a producer just to build that product. Then you've got to promote it, then you've got to put them on the road and put 4 or 5 lads on a tour bus or in a hotel, and hopefully they might actually sell a few tickets in the process. But to actually recoup that £500,000, £750,000 to sign a rock band is really difficult. You know, I think the only recent real sort of success would be someone like a Royal Blood, and they weren't signed by a major. You know, they built their own thing, then went up to Warner's, and Warner's would have, you know, given them a pretty ridiculous deal because they had their show was already popping. With the dance act, it's sort of, you can see a track, oh, that single's trending, this one's gone, that's, you know, it's done £500,000 on YouTube views, or, you know, the ridiculous one would have been, you know, that Gangnam Style garbage that did the rounds years ago, but every single major label saw that going off and on the graph, and it's kind of like, if you've ever seen a trading account, stocks and shares, you'll say, okay, well, what point on that graph do we need to get our offering? Do we wait until it goes up to 1 million views or 10 million views? And that's where the kind of the leverage thing comes in, because if, you know, we're going back to sort of the strengths and weaknesses. If you can build your own thing, all of a sudden you don't have to knock on the door at a major label. They'll come to you, and then you hold all the purse strings. You know, it's that thing of, well, you came to me, I'll tell you what I want, rather than go. You know, I think so many people, like young bands or acts, they want a record deal because they want the deal to have the deal, but actually the difference is, well, I'd having been in it a lot longer, I'd rather have no deal than a crap deal, because essentially you're going to sign you, especially like a 360 or you know, an artist-based deal as opposed to a single, you're going to sign your life away, and not ever, you know, there's countless examples of people I know who've signed huge publishing deals, big advance, they never recoup the advance, they're stuck in that deal for life, they cannot get a deal elsewhere, they will never, in theory, be able to put a record out before they've recouped that, however much money, which is pretty depressing. But that's the cold hard economics of business. With, you know, with dance stuff, of course, you can kind of hedge your bets and certainly sort of spread things a little bit wider. I certainly used to do it that way, where I would, you know, if you've got sort of 3, 4, 5 within your little subcategory of your genre, you'll have labels that are cool or that can be used for growing things. You know, you'll have a label that might not actually sell any records. The big example in recent years in America was Monster Cat. They were a YouTube channel. In this country, you'd have things like Subsoul, UKF, if any of you are in the sort of the drum and bass world. They all came from YouTube channels that would showcase music, and then realised, oh, actually, we're getting so many numbers on these, we should probably put the records out. You could kind of hedge your bets and go, okay, I've got a record there, a record there, a record there, and let's see where it pops, if anywhere. And then, if needs be, you can go and put all your eggs in that basket with one label. I don't really see that happening in the band world, where you kind of have a rock band doing a record on, you know, for example, you don't do one single on Warner's, one on EMI, and you won't necessarily do that. They have to buy into the whole product. I think what it means is you can keep moving as an electronic act. You know, you can go, you know, if you put a record out and it does nothing, we'll go, right, it's fine. Go on to the next one and the next one and the next one, and we'll just build it slowly. I think you can kind of navigate quicker and be really reactive.
I'm interested in this notion of brand. To what extent do you see yourself and what you do as a brand?
I mean, you have to. I think, especially now, because I think in the Spotify kind of era, you're kind of in the realm of everyone's into tracks. You don't buy an album, so it's sort of you have to have something else going on. I think on the pop side of things, one of the things the A&Rs have always mentioned to me is that the big thing they look for is likability. It's not, you know, you'll see infinite amounts of pop stars on TV, and you think, well, you're a crap singer. You didn't write your tune. What are you bringing to the table? And it's because they have likability. It's that thing that people buy into a personality. You know, the thing of sort of, you know, celebrity, for lack of a better word. It's that, you know, you can tell someone that when someone walks into the room, oh, they're a star. Can they write a song? No. Can they sing? No. But do they have star quality?
Charisma.
They have charisma, yeah. Certainly that. At the other end, I mean, closer to home for me is someone like Deadmau5, who is, I think, probably one of the best examples of a guy who's got his music sorted, but he's also, his brand is one of the most recognisable brands in music, along with like the famous lick of the Rolling Stones, you know, the Deadmau5 sort of ears. You know, the fact that he's getting sued by Disney on any given week kind of shows how big his brand is. He's, you know, he's dealing with brand, you know, these mega brands who see him as a threat. You know, it's the same as if you go down the street and see, you know, the McDonald's M, you know what it associates with, or Starbucks. It's kind of people knowing your aesthetic, be it a look for your act or a sound or even the scene, you know, you're associated with. You know, you'll associate Oasis and Blur with Britpop, and that's their sort of little world that it sits in. It's that thing, you know, you think of Drake, you think of a certain thing. You know, there'll be any act, any one of your favourite acts, you'll hear the name and you'll think of something cool. You'll hear it on the radio before you know it's what the record is, and you go, well, that's their brand, that's their signature sound. You know, when someone like Skrillex came along, for example, in the electronic world, he came on the radio and everyone's like, what the is that? It's crazy. And then you hear the second record and the third record and the fourth, it's like, oh, it's that guy again. It's that thing of sort of continuity. I think you can, brand-wise, I think it's really important to sort of set what it is early and stick with it for a while, rather than kind of going all arty-farty too early, and kind of you have to earn the right to diversify, really. Like, if you know, the first kind of 2 albums be really like a Raw Blood record. You know, you hear Raw Blood on the radio and you probably know it's them because they have a certain sound, not necessarily a look, but you know, it's the same with, you know, girl bands. You see a look and it's a look and a feel, or even it's like in the text or how the press is done. Or
so where are you at in the evolution of your brand?
We've got it. Yeah, we've got it. So unfortunately, I have a label and I have a PR company that kind of helps with that. We have a look, like an aesthetic. We use like a dark room thing. If you have a look nosy online, you better see things. But we have a look. So, for example, we're really very much tying in the visual aspect with the video stuff. So all my sort of artwork, video is continuity. It's very much, okay, that's the look. So you see it and begin to associate that look with that sound. Yeah, it's probably the best example.
I've got tons and tons of notes and questions here, but feel free to jump in at any time. Has anybody got any thoughts so far? Any questions, Chris? Yeah?
You mentioned that you were sort of part of like an old, well, I guess it's a while old now, but like Head Candy.
Yeah.
And that was, I guess, like a different era, because you're saying, you know, selling 1 million records in a year is like it's huge, isn't it? I mean,
well,
like,
yeah, in the current era, you won't get anybody who'll shift 1 million hard copy other than Adele.
Yeah, you know, so, but like, you know, how have you had to sort of adapt to like that change?
In terms of sales?
Well, just like, you know, how has your sort of business model changed, if you like?
Yeah, it's really
right,
interesting.
Yeah. So on the music side, I think your release, what am I trying to say? The days of the one-hit wonder and retiring have long gone. You know, the Roy Woods of this world, and you have a Christmas #1, you get 2 royalty checks a year, and that pays your bills. That's probably not happening. I think what you'll see more and more acts doing now is they'll do like brand alignments or exclusives. So I don't know if you saw recently when Drake released music, he'll do like a 1-week exclusive on, say, Spotify or Apple Music, and they will pay an astronomical amount to have that album exclusive on that platform. So you have to deal with the DSPs, your digital service things, you know, your Spotify, your Pandoras, Apple Music, etc., as a different beast. You'll probably get things like touring as well. Most tours now you'll see in association with a brand. I think the sync world has become more important than ever. You look every sort of, well, they'll be coming out about now, but like the blockbuster gaming market for things like, you know, your FIFAs, things like FIFA, I don't know if they still do it, like Resident Evil, all those kind of really high profile games. They were like the holy grail for sync. The huge things as far as like the super A-listers are things like the Super Bowl in America. You know, if you can get your track on an advert in the halftime show, you're pretty much guaranteed a hit record. So I think it's the where you earn your money is different now. The pot is still there. As far as you said, like selling X number of records in a year, you aren't doing that unless you're in the kind of ridiculous numbers of Spotify. I think the last I checked, and don't quote me on this, the numbers are roughly about, you earn about $4,500 for 1 million streams. So you can imagine how many streams you're having to do to just get up to like living wage off the music alone. You know, when you're getting into the really high, you know, the high numbers, you know, your Ed Sheerans, your Camila Cabello's, Taylor Swifts and these who are doing billions, hundreds of billions of streams, then you're making the big bucks. But of course, how many records a year hit 1 billion streams? So it's, as far as that, I think, you know, the record sales used to be a revenue stream. I think it's probably a trickle at the moment, but once it's online, of course, it can just earn, and it's there to be discovered. So it's almost like the music as in the release side of it is your calling card, and that's what fuels the touring side, where, you know, the real money is, and that's where you really build your career and your audience live, I think. Interestingly, how many of you guys recently, say in the last 12 months, bought an album? It's like a CD album. Not that many. Yeah, enough said. So it's kind of like, you know, do artists sell albums anymore? A very select few, but generally it's kind of the way you're releasing that music is different. You know, you like, say for example, someone like Calvin Harris is a good example. He'll do an album after like a 2-year campaign, so we'll have 2 years worth of singles, put it together at the end, of which 7 of those 12 records are already singles, and they've probably already been, well in Calvin's case, they've all been hits, they've all been number ones, they've all got platinum already. Then you'll get 3 fillers at the end, oh I haven't heard that one, whatever. And it's kind of
a compilation album.
It's a compilation of hits, yeah, rather than the days of sort of someone disappearing for a year, doing an album, putting it through the campaign. You know, the album will come out, or the first single will come out, then the album, then the 3rd, 4th and 5th, or however many singles you kind of earn the right to do. And then how that album is promoted is totally changed. So before, it was all about the kind of the hype, as I'd say, in the front end, so you'd build up to what's called an impact day of release. You'd probably have like either 1 or 2 singles, and you'd have a 6-month campaign that you'd go through to push that record. Now, it's almost like when you open a restaurant or a hotel, you do a soft opening. So you put it out there and just see how it does. People will kind of put the record out, and then they get to work on it. Because obviously they've got all these, it's 24/7 metrics of how's it selling there. Okay, we're doing really well in Venezuela, great. Okay, let's get a single out in Venezuela. We're doing brilliant in China, right? Let's go there. It means you can be more reactive, but being reactive is sometimes a good thing, sometimes a bad thing. I think, you know, if you're having to make an album based on metrics, social media stats, and this, your creativity is just going down and down and down and down and down. And you're probably already seeing that with things like Spotify, for example. We sent them something a couple of weeks ago with radio edit in brackets, you know, club mix, radio edit, dub, whatever. They don't want to hear radio edit because they want to know this is the version. So that for the first time in a long time, you know, there was always the thing of people making records for the platform that it's going for. So, you know, you aren't going to make a 12-minute jazz record for Radio 1, so you have to do a radio edit. Now people are doing like almost Spotify edits, and I'm sure if you guys you see when you go on iTunes, you'll see mastered for iTunes, mastered for Spotify, because each of these will have their own sort of algorithm that encrypts the record when it goes online. So everyone's almost having to jump through hoops for each of these DSPs. They have never been more powerful in terms of the breaking of an act, even compared to the days of record shops and HMV and Capitol and all these. You know, I think there's probably 1 HMV left in Birmingham. of which that, HMV will hold zero power in the creative process. Spotify, on the other hand, people are having to almost build a record that they know will work for what's called. Have you heard of the click-through rate, or any of these sort of metrics that Spotify? So click-through is essentially, if you click on a record and go, right, that's the new, the new Drake single. If you've got like a 2-minute intro on that record, of course, people are going to click through. I'm not interested in 2 minutes of drum solo to get to the vocal. And that doesn't go towards the plays now, or if you don't listen to the record all the way through, that doesn't count as a play. So that's why people are going, right, we need to get the vocal in the first, for example, on a pop record, you'll have the hook in the first 8 bars, they'll get it right in, meat and two veg straight away. You've got the Jaffers type thing, and then what happens after that is generally irrelevant anyway, because half the time it's rubbish, but they are structuring a record for the platform, which is, a really interesting dynamic.
So are you thinking about that in the studio?
You try not to, but it's really hard to not, because invariably you'll send a record off to the label and they go, what playlist is this going to work on? Or you don't have to, but you're always conscious of where that record's going to sit. As I said, you aren't going to necessarily make a 12-minute jazz record and go, let's give that to Annie Mac for Radio 1. She's not going to be able to play a 12-minute record on Radio 1. It's, okay, if we're going specialist, we'll go specialist. You kind of have to be able to put that record in a box, which is a real shame creatively that it can't just be what it wants to be, but it's the way of the world, unfortunately.
Yeah. Any more questions? That was a great question, by the way. Any more questions? Okay, we'll plough on. By all means, jump in. I asked you to think about legislation and new technology.
Yeah.
Have you got any thoughts? You mentioned about AI. Any thoughts about AI and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I've given Roy the link. I'll get him to fire you out an email. There's a few guys now. Obviously, AI has been used for a lot of things for a while on the sort of things like metrics and analysis mode. But what is starting to creep in now is AI being used on the creative side. If any of you have heard of a producer called Alex the Kid in America, he's one of the really early guys on this, who is essentially they'll use algorithms to work out key phrases that they think are topical for youth culture. I mean, it's creatively, it's just baffles me that people want to make a record this way, or how you can write a song that way. But they'll still little buzzwords, key phrases that people want to work on. They'll analyse things like themes. They'll even go as far as working out stuff like intervals between notes that people want to hear, repetitions of notes, which is why you get so much sort of paint by numbers pop music, because they know it works to the formula. Well, now they've gone to another level, and the computer can actually re-evaluate that record by basically saying, I want to sound like Queen, I want to recreate Queen Bohemian Rhapsody my own way, and it will recreate that for you in a slightly different way. Taking the analysis of the key, like the mode it's in, like certain scales that are involved in the record. It's an interesting world,
yeah, it is.
But does it kill creativity? Yes.
You mentioned about Music Modernisation Act in the States. Did you want to reflect on that at all?
So the Grammys and the BPI for a long time were campaigning essentially to make sure everyone gets paid, is what it comes down to. It's the best way to describe it. If you sign a deal, say you sign to Universal this morning, and you get your royalty rate and everything like that, but actually what you get paid is what the label gets paid by Spotify, and then you get paid. So what the Modernisation Act essentially gives is labels a fair cut of that artist's, that piece of catalogue that is being worked. You'll probably see in the music press every week there's a battle going on with YouTube trying to get people paid a fair rate. And the companies to get paid a fair rate, because what will happen is Universal or Sony or whoever will do a blanket agreement with, say, Spotify or YouTube, and every single one of those has to be different. And at the moment there are no rules, or there were very few rules in the digital age. The old contract that's probably been put together, I would guess it's probably the 50s and the 60s, as we were discussing, is completely obsolete on a digital world. So it's kind of trying to bring the contracts and the deals that the labels do with the shops and the providers to have a trickle-down effect for those artists, and also to cover to cover people in terms of, you know, things like YouTube. You know, if you want to put a video of your holiday up and you want to put a track by whoever on it, either does that artist get that monetised, or, you know, it's just it's kind of making the grey area a bit less grey is kind of what the agreement. I haven't got sort of the ins and outs of the law, but you know, that'd be something for, you know, a copyright lawyer to come in and tell you about.
Okay. You mentioned about companies like Cobalt and
Yeah.
Marvel. Do you want to reflect any more on what they
Yeah,
do?
so as I was saying to you earlier, obviously the record label model has obviously changed, the deal they can offer you has changed, and companies like Cobalt are kind of throwing themselves into the arena of almost being like a fourth major, because these are big tech companies. What Cobalt do, and AWAL and other companies at a similar thing, is rather than signing to a label and giving away all your creative control, they'll own the copyright. Originally it was aimed at established acts who'd come out of a deal. But what it does for a new act is essentially it means you can run your own show within a big corporation, and what they will offer you is a label services deal. So, for example, it's great for bands who can do that, who can run their own show creatively, great for dance acts, really good for rap artists and in sort of the urban world who can make their own, build their own show. So if you sign to someone like that, what they will offer you is you're buying into infrastructure, but they don't. You don't have the kind of the risk involved because you're running your own show. You still own, you retain your publishing, your copyrights. They'll take a cut on what it sells, and then you can kind of go through the gears with the company. So if they feel that okay, this artist is really popping, we can invest in them. We see an end goal here. Brilliant. But you won't have like an A&R department at Cobalt telling you to do put some horrible pop act that you don't want to work with on your record, or forced collabs from the publishing department, or you can press your own way. So for someone like, as I work with deadmau5, he runs his own ship from top to bottom. Like he's as adept in the studio programming a modular synth as he is dealing with an intellectual property lawyer. So for him it's great. He has complete creative freedom. Everything within his label and the other acts on his label, like myself, it kind of gets put through the machine, but he can set up how he wants that run rather than being, beholden to someone's release schedule or budgets, or even just having to deal with people you don't really want to deal with. You can have your artist manager and yourself act like as a CEO of your company, and it creates all sorts of possibilities long term. Once you kind of build your own show to get fair reward when you have success. The flip side being, are you going to get broken through one of these acts? That's a really open to debate. Are these labels probably built more for legacy acts, established artists?
Who've come through the old system.
Yeah, and they have their fan base. Are they going to, sometimes with the thing that the majors do really well is they kind of put their foot on the gas basically when you need it. So when as I said earlier, the 0 to 60 point of your career where you're just coming through and you need press support, you need tour support, they have infrastructure in place to kind of put you through the machine that bit faster than an indie. They can get you high quality press, they can get you on tour with a bigger act, they can get you out to America and get your visa sorted, they have especially the majors now, they have a global web, they have an Australian arm, an Asian arm, South America, they can work you as a global act. Independently, I think that's probably harder.
Okay. Could you reflect on the world of publishing? Any thoughts about how that's going, or your own experience of publishing, that kind of thing?
I would say, for you guys who are more necessarily producer-based, as opposed to straight-up artists, the publishing deal is far more important than a record deal. You can have a publishing deal last a lot longer. Your terms will generally be longer. A record deal, you could be in and out the door in 6 months. If someone might sign you, they might get fired. The new A&R comes in and hates you and goes, "Sorry, see you later." Publishing, I always was taught to equate it to something like a horse race, or if you want to use a football analogy. So in a horse race, of course, you can bet on those horses before they even set foot on the track. You can have a look at their form guide on a Thursday or a Friday and go, "Yeah, he's kind of the favourite. I'll back him." And you might get all right odds. You can bet on them again when they're in the stalls. The odds might have got a bit lower. You can then bet on that horse when they're halfway around the course. They're looking likely to win. Great. The odds are going to go down again. you can even bet on them maybe when they're virtually at the finishing line and they've got an unassailable lead. And it'll, the odds again are dreadful, but you can put the bet on if you want.
Yeah.
Publishing's kind of like that. There's no record deals the same to a point, but probably bigger numbers involved. And it's the thing of when that publisher wants to get involved. You're probably more likely to get a publishing deal early in your career than you are a record deal. But a publisher can be a lot less risk averse than a record company. The record company has to come good on their investment.
Yeah.
A publisher can play a much longer game with you. So you might have you see examples all the time of really young artists, kids who come out of the Brit School, 15, 16, they'll put them in a publishing deal, they'll get them in the studio, get them working for a few years. Someone like Ella Eyre is a really good example of an actor who sort of came through very slowly, wrote for other people, they got her in the right circles, and then started building an artist career off the back of writing for other people. The huge example over a longer period is someone like Sia, who obviously she was writing for everyone for a long time and then had success as an artist later on. Bruno Mars was another one. Publishing wise, you'll probably, as I said, because you can bet at any point in the process, if you go in early when you've written 1 or 2 good songs, you will more than likely get a pretty poor deal. Whereas if you're coming off the back of 3 number ones, a Grammy nomination and whatever else, you kind of hold the purse strings. And I think that's the same in any business model, is that thing of leverage. It's when you get involved, when you approach a publisher, when do you feel you need a publisher as well, or if they could approach you, or do you approach them, or it's a little bit more flexible, I think, publishing. Certainly with if you guys want to maybe go on to the not necessarily sound design, but the instrumental side of music, production music, sync, film. That's when a publisher becomes a bit more important. If you're a straight-up songwriter, you'll probably have a publishing deal before you have a record deal, or they'll sign you on a big 360, as we discussed, and they'll just take a cut of everything.
Could you just reflect about soundtracks for a minute? So that's something that you're
that's something I'm sort of involved in. So, soundtrack-wise, I think if some people are brilliant composers, but they're crap with lyrics, or they don't want to write songs, or they're just very, very consistent in the studio, or they come off guys who come off big artist careers. We were talking earlier about Clint Mansell, who did Pop Will Eat Itself. The band had kind of finished. What do we do now? The next obvious step for a lot of people is, well, I write songs really well, I can compose. Why not have a look at soundtrack stuff, production music? It's kind of a world where there is still money. You aren't reliant on sales to make your money. You'll get your commission, you'll get a back end on your publishing. Creatively speaking, I think it opens up all sorts of possibilities for guys who are potentially wanting to be in the sort of the sound design world. Really formal composers, I think I think you guys are probably more technically driven over here, but certainly next door for the guys who play, your pianists, your pen and paper compositional students, and it's probably a longer career. The kind of you're hot and you're not in any specific genre, or in recorded music is probably shorter. Your soundtrack thing, I don't know how old Hans Zimmer is, but he's been doing it a long time. He did Video Killed the Radio Star in probably the 80s with the Buggles, and that was his little artist thing that he did very early on, and then went into the film world, and in theory, he'll be doing that until he wants to stop. Same as people like Junkie XL, who kind of came through the dance world and did his artist thing. He had the Little Less Conversation record that was monstrously big and it got synced everywhere, and he kind of fell into that world because of it. How does that link with publishing? I think it gives you a broader catalogue.
Yeah.
If you're a guy who just sings love songs or writes pop music, there's this whole other world of the wider musical spectrum that you can actually dip your toe into, that you're kind of not allowing yourself to go into. Every now and then on a blockbuster film, you'll get a hit record, being like a theme tune, or. But those opportunities are much fewer and far. So they're just not there anymore, other than for the established acts. I think you can work your way into the soundtrack world. There's a lot of, you'll have film students in probably in this building or next door who will need soundtracks for their films, and it's, you're never going to know who that student might go on to be. It's kind of, you can work from the ground up, I think, is probably the best way of putting it. You can start with absolutely nothing and build at your own pace.
Okay, I'm asking everyone this question, so bear with me. But Brexit, what does it mean for you?
Hassle. Needless hassle is the thing. Ultimately, no one, it's so early in the process, no one knows if it's an opportunity or a threat yet. In theory, is it both? Probably. The big things that certainly the Musicians' Union are talking about is policing copyright law, royalty rates per region. There's talk of sort of freedom of movement. I don't think that the French are going to stop us going on holiday anytime soon. But essentially, in European terms, are we the dominant music economy? Yes, by a country mile. I think the music industry in Britain, our export is about 9 billion. So are the Europeans going to want us to not have music in Europe? I think not. The thing that I think is the biggest, not necessarily a threat, but it's certainly an annoyance for sort of touring, will be the freedom of movement, and will we need a visa to go to Europe as a whole? You know, for the big boys, will it make much difference? Probably not. It's just a bit of extra paperwork that they'd rather not have to do. For a new act, that can be the difference between, you know, if you've got a five-piece band, manager, crew, call it 10 people travelling with that band, each one of those has to have a visa at X number of, you know, say it's 100 euros for that visa. Who foots the bill? Does the promoter pay? Does the artist have to pay their own? Does the record label? Does the management company? Is that an argument waiting to happen? Probably, but for example, if you've got those people and it's costing you £1,000 just to get that act into that marketplace, their fee might not even be that. You know, is the promoter, say on a festival, when he's booking his festival bill, going, right, I need to bring all those acts over from England, can I actually warrant the cost of a brand new band from England who's going to cost me this much money, who aren't going to sell enough tickets to pay for it? Is it worthwhile investment? Maybe not.
Yeah.
You know, it's the real, you know, I hate having to sit up here and talk about boring economics as a creative, but unfortunately, with things like Brexit, most of it does come down to money. That's the thing that they've been arguing over for the last year, 2 years, about who's going to hold the purse strings. You know, or if you have a record that's going ballistic in Italy, is that, you know, are you going to get fairly repaid your royalties? If you have something that gets licensed in Poland, you know, do you have control over that copyright? Are you going to have to pay a premium on your royalties? For example, if you go to America and have a hit record, you're going to get taxed twice. So if you make $1 million on a record, you're actually making $500,000 because Uncle Sam takes 50% before you've even started. Then you get back to the UK and whoever's government at the time is going to tax you on that again. So it's kind of like, will that the same thing happen in the EU region? And all of a sudden, you know, I think we spoke earlier, there was an image that the average salary in the music industry is 52% lower than in any other industry for the same job. So if you're a marketing professional, you are getting paid 52% less to work for that record company, which is pretty depressing.
I've got more questions, but anybody got any questions? Do you want to jump in at this point? Yeah.
For people who produce a lot of electronic music,
Yeah.
probably start out by doing remixes and bootlegs.
Yeah.
The problem is though, as soon as you chuck them up on SoundCloud or anything, they're just instantly taken down. So how would you say people starting out and just trying to get a little bit of recognition, how can they get around the whole grey area?
Right, okay. I thought someone might ask about this, because I've done this on a few things, where you'll hear a record and go, oh, that'll really work in a club, as I'm sure you can imagine. I don't have the parts, all right, I'll bootleg it. The best way to do it is, I would say, if you go to the record company and say, can I put this out, and they say no, you're stuffed. If you can put it up and apologise afterwards, it's a hell of a lot easier than asking for permission. Because every now and then there are loads of examples where bootlegs, that Kygo Sexual Healing record, horrible, but that was a bootleg. And there's been numerous examples of where a bootleg's turned into an official one. So I think if the record is good, if it's a good bootleg, The record label will see that as an opportunity.
They'll make a deal, won't they?
They'll make a deal with you on it, yeah. Probably won't be a good deal, but they will see value in that record. As far as doing it for the purposes of sort of exposure, certainly, you put a record on SoundCloud now, every major label or any half-decent label has an algorithm that spots it. You put a Calvin Harris bootleg or a Beyonce bootleg up on SoundCloud, it's pulled it down before it's even encrypted it. I would say hunt around, use things like LinkedIn, find the A&R who looks after that artist and say, listen, I've done this, we think it's really good. It's the same thing as I was talking to you earlier about where in the process a label gets involved. It's the thing of traction. So, for example, if you, I don't know who's number one at the moment. For example, you've got a Camila Cabello record or whoever, Rihanna has a new record out that's due. Rihanna puts that record out and it's like, 80 BPM or whatever. It's not going to work in a club, right? I need to do a club remix. You think, I've done a really good job of this, right? Well, let's try and get it to Jay Brown, let's see if he can actually push this. Or find another avenue in, not necessarily just putting it online for profile. If you think about the wider profile, is how am I going to get this to the biggest audience? Something like SoundCloud, Mixcloud, Heartless, I think is another one, aren't necessarily now the way to go. Or things like fan gating, if you've ever done fan gating on Facebook, where click like and you get this. But there's no reason why you can't get it up to things like Radio 1. I think that's probably the route to go with the bootleg now. Whereas if there's a record that someone like Annie Mac or Grimmy or those guys are playing on the daytime shows, find a way to get in. You can find most people's email on LinkedIn or find a route to that person. Certainly someone like Annie Mac, Pete Tong, Danny Howard. Danny's open to anything and everything. Danny at djdannyhoward.com. You can hammer him with tracks. And if it's good enough, they'll play it. So certainly, if it's simply for traction, if you're trying to make money off that bootleg, then I think you're in the realms of you are going to get sued. If you're trying to monetize a SoundCloud link, monetize a YouTube link. But if it's purely for profile, I'd go down the Airplay route, try and get it on KISS, try and get it on Capital, on the specialist shows, get it on Radio 1, 1Extra, get it in that way where you're going to get a far bigger audience, and then people will come back to you, even if that record isn't on your profile, they still know you as the guy who did that bootleg.
Have you got any general bits of advice for students who are trying to have like a portfolio approach to trying to make a living out of this business? Any general bits of advice?
I think it's finding little niches and opportunities that are maybe unique to what you do. A lot of people are very good on the creative side. You have you find like virtuoso musicians who don't know anything about production or engineering. You'll have, I'm sure the skill set in this room is really varied. I'm sure a lot of you will play instruments. Some of you will be really good on a computer. Some of you will be like a whiz with a Pro Tools rig. Some will be amazing beat makers. And it's finding something that's unique to you to get your foot in the door. And then once you get in, it's having that breadth. We were talking about this earlier. For example, I know guys who've been engineers in studios, just sort of being the Pro Tools guy. But if they're in a writing session and they can actually strum a guitar, and it's kind of like, oh, we should put keys this in. We're in that. Okay, great. Suddenly you're in on the writing session, or if you have wider skills, if the record goes, the record's crap, it's missing something. What do we need? Oh, we need strings. Great. Can anyone arrange strings? Great, I can do that. It's essentially having the biggest toolkit you can, being like a Swiss Army knife in the studio, or if you're live, if you can run a lighting desk or a visuals desk along with a big front of house desk, or if you're able to run front of house and monitors, if you can stage manage and do monitors, if you can, if you're not technically adept but you're the only guy on the whole tour who the band get on with, well then you're probably the most important person on that tour, because the band do not want to deal with a stroppy sound guy. It's finding your strengths that are unique to you and going, well, how can I get the best out of these? What am I necessarily weak at? Right? Do I need to either improve it or go, you know what, I'll just put that to one side and that's someone else's gig.
How important is networking to what you do?
I mean, it's everything. But not in the traditional sense of turning up to mixers and getting pissed and kind of going, yeah, nice to meet you, nice to meet you, nice to meet you. It's kind of, I was always taught there's a skill in knowing who to network with, and something like LinkedIn you have a path right up to most companies' CEO now, so you can go, okay, I need to know, that's the head of HR, right, they're going to give me a job, and then knowing how to approach them in a sort of professional manner, or know socially, okay, we're running this event. In terms of the straight up sort of the artist approach, or if you're a sort of a production-based guy or girl, it's the thing of your reputation is everything. Getting your foot in the door is one challenge, staying in the door is another, but the best way for that network to grow once you've got it moving is be really good. I mean, it really is that simple. I mean, I used the example of the boss, but I don't know if any of you have ever seen an interview with Deadmau5. His social skills are bordering on non-existent, but when he came through, he was just so bloody good that everyone wanted to be part of what he was doing. Everyone wants to be around you. You know, I'm sure there's guys in this course who, if you'll have your go-to guy, I'm struggling academically with my coding bit, right, and I'll go to him, right, he's my guy who I need to copy his homework. Or, right, I need some beats.
Get advice from him.
Yeah. Or, I've got a great guitar track, I need a drummer, right, anyone play the drums? Great, I need to know him.
Yeah.
It's kind of having your go-to guy for things, or people who you can bring something to their table, they can bring something to yours. I think is really important, otherwise it's take, and I think your network falls apart. Whereas if you can, as I said, if you can be like a Swiss Army knife in the studio, you'll always be of use to someone.
Yeah.
And then once you've got your foot in the door, if you do a good job, you're very seldom going to get fired if you've done a good job. If you've been a nice person, you've done a good job, generally they'll be impressed. I know countless guys who've got gigs sort of on the live side by accident, or even in the studio because they got on well. Javier, who was the drummer with Stereophonics, he was the guy running the Pro Tools rig. Oh, we need to know, do program stuff at the time. Oh, we need some drums. We need to get a session drummer in. Oh, it's all right, I can play drums. Does the takes. They love what they sound like. Oh, do you want to join the band? Yeah, great, it's better than making cups of tea for you lot. There's been countless examples of that where the guy in the background, I forget the guy's name, the guy who did the soundtrack for Game of Thrones was one of the runners at Hans Zimmer studio. Hans and his team were kind of struggling on a queue for one of the films they were working on. He said, would it be alright if I came in overnight, worked on your rig, and just had to play with it just to see, no one else has managed to crack it. What can, no harm. Sat in the studio all night, the rest of the main boys come in the next morning. Oh wow, you've nailed it, great. You won't be making a cup of tea anymore. And now he's sort of now going through the motions, going through the gears of having this amazing career off. Essentially, it's a happy accident. And I always say that to people like in the studio or on a business side, is allow for that happy accident to happen. If you the cliche phrase in songwriting is like if you throw enough shit at the wall, something will stick eventually. Or there's the Noel Gallagher quote of if you're a writer or a producer, it's like going fishing. If you put your rod in the water every day, eventually you're going to catch something. It might be like a shopping trolley or a boot, but eventually you have a far greater chance of catching something really big. And it's just it's the thing of just get out there and do it. Is probably the phrase I say to everyone. If you want to be a producer, start producing. If you want to be an engineer, try and engineer. If you want to A&R a band, go out in Birmingham, find a band that you're passionate about, and push them. I think it's kind of do it. You've obviously been at uni. I think you guys are all second year, so you've been here a year. You might be starting to think about what you want to do after your third year or a year in industry. But essentially, by rights, you're all industry professionals already. Whether you know it or not, you just got to sort of find what your little niche is going to be.